Hi there, and welcome to our self-guided historic walking tour of South Mountain Community College. I'm Dr. Summer Sherland, history faculty here at SMCC. Our self-guided tour can be paced to fit your timeline and interests, but fully completing the tour takes about an hour. The tour is a little bit different from a typical campus tour you might have elsewhere. It's intended to familiarize you with the campus itself, while also introducing you to the history of South Phoenix, Arizona, and the greater Southwest. Because of that, each stop along the way gives you a little bit of information about the location you're visiting, but also how South Phoenix and Arizona fit within a greater story of American history. I hope you enjoy. Our tour begins here at the award-winning Performing Arts Center, which, built in 2003, is one of the newest structures on campus. Turn your attention to where you think the front entrance of our campus must be. As you stand on the balcony, consider this. Like the rest of our campus, which opened in 1981, the PAC and most of the buildings on our campus are oriented south, towards the South Mountains, which were formed by shifting tectonic plates roughly 30 million years ago. I want to tell you a story about the South Mountains. Muhadagduwag lords over the basin that splits two of the most powerful rivers in Arizona, the Gila and the Salt. The Akimel Odom say that when Trickster Coyote stole Rattlesnake's first victim from a cremation fire, the people chased him. Coyote sprinted northward and across the Gila River. He came to rest on the mountains north of the river. As he gobbled down the stolen feast, fat oozed from the hot meat, staining the mountains with the dripping grease. This is why Muhadagduwag, whose other names include Greasy Mountain, the Salt River Mountains, and the South Mountain Preserve, is a dark gray color. The South Mountains divide the Gila and Salt River basins, which were home to ancient farmers and desert dwellers from about 300 BC to 1200 AD. These people, called the Hohokam, built innovative aqueducts that rivaled the ancient Romans and helped them convert an inhospitable desert into a blooming farmland. They called this range Muhadagduwag, meaning Greasy Mountain, connecting the dark gray color of the mountains to a coyote story about stolen food. The Hohokam are thought to have disappeared sometime around 1200 AD, but many people alive today believe themselves to be descendants of the Hohokam. The Akimel Odom people call these ancient desert dwellers Huhukam, meaning those who have passed but are still among us. You can actually see evidence of these ancient people among us today, especially if you hike into the South Mountains. South Mountain Preserve is the largest municipal preserve in the country, and it's also home to some of the oldest petroglyphs in America, all left by the Hohokam centuries ago. When you look north up here on the PAC balcony, you should see two towers. They belong to the Holy Family Catholic Parish, our neighbor just up the street. When our college first began offering classes, it took about a year before our campus was fully constructed and we had classrooms in which to operate. So back in 1980, some of our original classes and the student services like recruitment and advising were held at that church. But those towers didn't exist back in 1980. They were actually part of a more recent renovation done by the church in what's called mission architecture style. See, mission architecture is really common in the Southwest. Think about those pink-tiled houses you see in the sprawling suburbs of Phoenix and Los Angeles. Mission architecture references the era of Spanish colonization, when Catholic priests and conquistadors sought to dominate the American Southwest and claim it for Spain. Their priorities can be understood as the 3 G's: gold, glory, and God. They established missions all across the California coast in places like Santa Cruz, San Francisco, Santa Barbara, and San Diego in order to convert and Christianize Native people. For nearly 300 years, from 1521 to 1821, Spanish religion and political influence was dominant in the American Southwest. Today, evidence of Spanish culture and religion is still evident in our community. Catholicism, too, played a vital role in the origins of our city's architecture. In fact, the first permanent church erected in Phoenix was a Catholic basilica built by Mexican Americans at the end of the 19th century. We come now to the Xeriscape Garden. Wander around for a bit. Take a look at some of the dramatic and interesting plants. Maybe you might even see some animals, little birds, or some lizards. Wander around a bit. Most of these plants are native to the Southwest, and few require much water or maintenance. Two of the most symbolic to Arizona are the Palo Verde, meaning green bark, and the towering saguaro cactus. Can you find both? The Spanish laid claim to California, modern-day Mexico, and the Southwest from the 16th century until Mexican independence in 1821. During this time, they introduced several new aspects of life to the native people living along the California coast, in Mexico, and in what is today Arizona. The Spaniards initially brought weapons, livestock, and new crops. They also brought with them old world diseases to which many native people succumbed. It might surprise you to learn that horses, a Southwestern staple, were first introduced to the Americas by the Spanish in the 16th century. Those wild horses you've seen in the movies, they didn't always exist here in America. And in return, native people traded farming techniques and crops, like corn and potatoes, which originated in what was called the New World, as well as precious minerals like gold. This global trade network eventually became known as the Columbian Exchange. Perhaps the most interesting and less known product of the Columbian Exchange was from a plant you might see here in our Xeriscape Garden. For years, Europeans had struggled to develop a colored ink, to dye things like their clothing and other textiles. All they had really was black, some blue-gray, and browns. So when the Spanish first arrived in what they called the New World, they were delighted to see people dressed in vibrant reds and purples throughout the Aztec Empire. The color red itself was a precious commodity, and for whatever reason, they could only get it from the Southwest and modern-day Mexico. Take a look around our Xeriscape Garden and guess where a color red might come from among these native plants. Maybe you thought of berries on some of the trees or the pink flowers on a prickly pear cactus. If you ever pass a prickly pear cactus that looks as if it's growing kind of a soapy, foamy mold on its plump, spiky green pads, you've just seen the origins of red in nature. That mold is actually egg sacs of a small beetle that, when ground up, creates the color red. The Spanish today are still known for their vibrant reds throughout history. Even the Spanish flag is saturated with the color red in an homage to their contact with the Aztec people who knew how to grind up beetles in order to discover and use the color red. As you come to the center of campus, you'll see a giant glittering mosaic surrounded by risers and some of our original campus buildings. This is the Mandala. It was built in 1996 as a celebration of our campus and our community's mixed cultural heritage. What are some precious metals you see in this artwork? What about the kinds of rocks or stone? After Mexico won independence from Spain in 1821, they essentially claimed all of Spain's northern territory in the Americas, including present-day Arizona. But within a few decades, gold was discovered in California, and the American Southwest became a battleground for U.S. expansion, leading to the Mexican-American War. When the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo ended the war in 1848, the whole of our modern Southwest, including the richly diverse people living here, came under the claim of the United States. All of a sudden, America had to figure out how to govern newly anointed citizens who had spent the last 3 centuries evolving from Native, Mexican, and Spanish influences. So when you look around our campus, and around South Phoenix in general, you'll see evidence of these mingling cultures. Look around from this point here. Do you see any examples of Native artwork, or Native history, Mexican culture, or Spanish influence represented in the walls of our campus? What do you see? You might notice the adobe-like structures of the buildings, designed in 1980 by the famed Southwest architect Benny Gonzalez, who sought to celebrate the ancient history of our community. You might see artwork and carvings in the sides of the buildings, referencing Native American history. See, our community is home to a rich blend of diverse cultures, even today, and the structure of our campus reflects this proud heritage. In 40 years, we've had 5 different college presidents, each with his or her own personality and influence. Our current president is one of 2 women to serve in the role, and the only woman to do so in a full-time capacity. If you were to ask Dr. Olson what initially drew her to this campus, she'll tell you it was our vision statement, which is represented here on this wall. South Mountain Community College educates minds, transforms lives, touches hearts, and builds community. Again, looking around right here at this spot, you might see evidence of our state's and our community's history built into the fabric of our college, like the technology timeline over on the wall near the elevators. Women helped to make South Mountain Community College what it is, just like women helped to make our state what it is. In the mid-19th century, Arizona was stuck in territorial purgatory. The United States did not want to admit Arizona as a state because they believed the territory lacked resources, attractive opportunities for farming and development, and a sufficient pool of white male voters and landowners. After decades of trying to convince the federal government, and after a brief stint as a Confederate state during the Civil War, Arizona finally won official statehood in 1912. They did so using a couple of tactics. Their first was to prove that they had enough voters to meet the standards of statehood, but not enough white men lived in Arizona to meet the quota. So, they granted suffrage to white women, 8 years before the 19th Amendment was passed in 1920. But this doesn't mean that Arizona was a progressive state from the beginning. In fact, almost immediately following statehood, legislation was put in place to create employment and housing restrictions for people of color throughout the state, and especially in the Phoenix area. We are now standing in the South Mountain Community Library, which opened in 2011. The library is a partnership between the college and the city of Phoenix, making it one of the only in the country to share systems and space among academic and municipal entities. Students and our neighbors are welcomed and encouraged to learn here. And when you look around, you should get a sense of the special design elements that were incorporated to reflect our state's unique history in this beautiful building. Back during their long-fought campaign to statehood in the 19th century, Arizonans struggled to convince the United States government that their territory was of value. Before granting white women the right to vote in Arizona, officials used other tactics to cull favor with the feds. They first looked to the mining industry. Legend has it that in 1911, an Arizona territorial representative marched into Congress and slammed a hunk of Arizona mined silver the size of a Volkswagen Beetle on the desk of the Speaker of the House. But Arizona wasn't actually known for silver or for gold. Copper was king here. Territorial lawmakers and boosters also began advertising a package of goods unique only to Arizona. So that's how, in the early 20th century, Arizona began marketing the 5 C's, 5 industry items unique to this state that would attract the federal government as well as future settlers. Copper deposits were plentiful and attractive during the Industrial Revolution as a conductor of electricity. Cattle drives were common as hungry Americans developed their taste for beef alongside the emerging consumer revolution. Arizona also provided the perfect growing climate for cotton, which was used for clothing and rubber, and later in World Wars I and II. Citrus trees bearing oranges, lemons, limes, and grapefruit were plentiful in the Salt River Valley. And of course, the 5th C, climate. Climate attracted a larger population to the state over time and made agriculture the new kid in town. As you admire our library's design, do you catch glimpses of those 5 C's? Do you see copper paneling on the walls? How about the bright, airy light which creates an ambient climate? What about those etched drawings of citrus or cotton blossoms lining the stairways? Around here, we take for granted that our library has representation of the 5 C's. But you might not be able to find that last C. Do you see any representation of cattle? That's a little clue. The architect actually didn't even intend to incorporate the 5 C's in the design of this building. That's why you don't see cattle. Instead, he chose to emphasize the agricultural history of South Phoenix itself. So this tells us, even if by accident, that South Phoenix has been home to most of the pillars of Arizona history from the very beginning. You might be wondering why I've brought you to the edge of a parking lot. But this is an important spot. If you look at that western border of our campus, you should see some geographical features that originate here before our campus was born. Any guesses to what I might be talking about? Immediately following statehood in 1912, the rural areas south of Phoenix closely resembled the sharecropping of the American South. For decades, Mexican farmers had been developing this area for farming. They carved out their own canal system and grew many of Arizona's most famous crops here at the base of the South Mountains. But they were discriminated against when it came to voting, conducting business, and owning land. Eventually, wealthy white ranchers began buying up plots of land here in South Phoenix and, using the sharecropping system of the South, rented out parcels of land to poorer farmers of color who had to pay off their debts with crop production. Mexican and Mexican-American farmers were particularly vulnerable in these scenarios, as many lost their lands to repossession during World War I and the Great Depression. Dwight Hurd, who's famous in Arizona as a rancher, newspaperman, and politician, made considerable land purchases in this area at that time and created some landmarks like the column of palm trees you see across the parking lot. New neighbors arrived before World War II when Japanese and Japanese-American families began buying land that no one else seemed to want, and they transformed the land. After spending several years cultivating this land, many lost their farms in World War II when they were incarcerated in Japanese internment camps as a result of nationwide xenophobia. However, When the war ended, most families moved back to South Phoenix and started all over again. Within a couple of decades, 7 Japanese American families established an agricultural empire known as the Japanese Flower Gardens, which stretched for acres along Baseline Road just to the south of where we stand. They were a tourist destination as people came from all around to see the famous roses and flowers at the base of the mountains. These Japanese flower gardens also sold to markets on either coast, with customers out in Los Angeles and as far away as New York City. In 1978, the Hurd Corporation sold this land we are standing on to the Maricopa Community College District in order to build a campus. The only thing left from those days are the palm trees behind us and the canal to the south. Our tour ends here, on the Immovable Bridge, which was constructed in 2011 as part of the Fry's Marketplace development. We end here because it's an excellent physical example of history and of ancient meeting the present, right here on the edge of our campus. You might not even realize it, but you are standing at the base of Muhadog Duag. Look down. This canal is ubiquitous in Arizona. All of us have interacted with it in one way or another. We've driven over it, biked next to it, fished in it, and some have even taken a swim. So here you are in the shadow of Greasy Mountain. Look around. Everywhere are signs of modern development in the area. But we can also see evidence of living history. That Fry's Marketplace, it's sitting in the middle of what was one of the largest rose gardens in the country, grown by a Japanese-American man who was interned at a camp during World War II right here in Arizona. Those palm trees, they've been here since the Dwight Hurd Corporation was leasing the land to Mexican-American sharecroppers. The copper on the walls of the library and the pack glittering in the sun, Arizona mined. And none of this would be here in the great American desert were it not for one thing: water. Remember how I told you the Hohokam left behind proof of their legacy in the form of petroglyphs up there on the mountain? We may have lost track of the Hohokam's direct ancestry, but their living legacy is all around us. In fact, you're standing on top of it. When the earliest Mexican and white settlers arrived in the Salt River Valley in the 1860s, they discovered ancient canals, dug over 2,000 years ago by the Hohokam to irrigate the Salt and Gila rivers. And they did a really good job. So good, in fact, that these white and Mexican ranchers didn't even need to reinvent the wheel. They simply used the Hohokam canals to bring water to their new city. And they called this new city Phoenix, after the ancient mythical bird who rose from the ashes of a long since forgotten history. So these canals that are so prevalent in Phoenix, the Salt River Project, the Central Arizona Project, they are built on top of ditches once used by people whose name has been misinterpreted to mean vanished. But they haven't vanished, have they? Their legacy is all around us. So South Phoenix and South Mountain Community College have ancient and modern significance, and you can see it for yourself every time you walk onto campus. I hope this tour has been fun and informative and has given you a little glimpse into what our campus life is like here at South Mountain Community College. But I also hope it's given you the chance to consider the fact that history is everywhere you go. Everywhere you go, there's evidence of the past in every footstep you take. If you want to know more about the history of South Phoenix or the history of South Mountain Community College, take a look at our website, southphoenixoralhistory.com.